President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping met virtually last night for about 3.5 hours. In their first meeting since the president took office, the two world leaders discussed several issues ranging from climate change to human rights. The virtual summit comes amid growing economic and military tensions between the U.S. and China. And for more on this, Ed O'Keefe is at the White House for us. Hey, good morning, Ed. Listen, we got all the tea from Remy and Asensio on the other side of the world in Hong Kong, the Chinese point of view. I need the tea from Washington, D.C. How did President Biden's virtual meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping go, and what did the two discuss? Were there any major breakthrough announcements?
So you got the tea from Remy, you'll get the black coffee from here in D.C. They called it a substantial and respectful exchange over 3.5 hours, broken up into two sessions. There was a bit of a break in between. Late night here at the White House, early morning in Beijing as they talked through a host of issues. Remember, these are two guys that have known each other for several years since the Obama administration. Vice President Biden, then Vice President Biden, spent some time with him in China and here in the United States. He had campaigned on the idea and has served as president on the idea that he's one of the world leaders who knows Xi the best because they've spent about 20 hours or so in each other's presence. Last night in a virtual exchange, no major breakthroughs, which the White House had cautioned in advance was the idea, that there wasn't going to be some major agreement, but just an agreement to keep talking, to try to keep the two biggest world economic and increasingly military superpowers on the same page and aware of each other's similarities and differences, if you will. No specific discussion of the hypersonic missile test, for example, that China conducted over the summer that military officials here have been concerned about. No real big conversations about trade, which, of course, are a sticking point because of U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. And apparently no invitation from Xi to President Biden to attend the Beijing Olympics. That's partly because official invitations are supposed to come from the International Olympic Committee, but some saw it as an opportunity for him to extend an invitation. And it's unclear if the president would actually take it.
Yeah, that might have been an awkward position. And speaking of awkwardness, oftentimes when old pals get together to talk, there are uncomfortable topics that do come up. Human rights, climate change. President Biden presents himself as kind of like a straight shooter, tough talker. Do we know whether he pushed Xi Jinping on human rights issues, on climate change issues?
The White House says they did, but wouldn't get into details of what exactly was discussed. Remember, on climate change, that had actually been a pretty meaty subject of conversation between U.S. and Chinese officials over the last 2 weeks at that COP26 summit in Scotland, where both countries agreed to continue working together to reduce the world's emission of fossil fuels. But also, it's kind of seen as one where they kind of have to work together because there's mutual self-interest, frankly, for human existence in order for that to happen. Human rights, of course, is a trickier one. And it's also notable that in the Chinese statements, at least, they were very clear that they don't want the U.S. talking to them much about Taiwan, the situation there. Obviously a far more sensitive one to the Chinese. And so it doesn't appear as if that was a big topic either.
So earlier in the day, because the president had a big day, he actually signed his infrastructure bill into law on a very chilly lawn, South Lawn, as I saw from your Instagram picture. And one of the things that he said was that this bill would better position the U.S. to compete with China and other nations vying for dominance of emerging industries. So we've talked often about the impact of this bill domestically, but how will it help the U.S. be competitive globally?
Well, what he pointed out yesterday, and appears to be true, is that next year, for the first time in 20 years, the United States is now set to spend more on its physical infrastructure than China. That alone is a signal to China and to the rest of the world of how serious the U.S. is in investing in itself and bolstering its roads and bridges, its airports, its seaports. That helps boost the global economy, helps, of course, promote and make international travel easier, not only for Americans, but for people coming in. So there is a real national security interest in doing this. And, of course, also because a big part of this is designed to mitigate climate disasters. It's also seen as a significant down payment on avoiding big, natural and man-made disasters that come with weather events, not here across this country, whether it's those that hurricane activity, for example, that killed a handful of people in the New York City area over the summer, or all the coastal flooding that occurs down in the South. So he has made clear since he campaigned on this promise that this was not only designed to bolster the American economy and create millions of jobs, but also designed to sort of demonstrate to the world how serious we are about fixing our own economy, investing in ourselves, and showing countries like China that this democratic republic, at least, or this democratic government, small d democratic government, is still investing in its country and in its workers.
Yeah. So this may be a done deal, but President Biden's still trying to make sure that he can sell it convincingly to the American people. He's heading to New Hampshire today to talk about this new, I was going to call it a bill. It's a law now. What can we expect to hear from him there?
He's heading to tiny Woodstock, New Hampshire. There's a bridge in that town that's going to need to be repaired, and this new law helps pay for it. And the example that they're trying to show here is this is one of the tens of thousands of bridges across the country that in one way or another are deemed in need of repair or replacement. So why not go up to beautiful New Hampshire in the middle of the fall and talk about that, and do so in a state where they're going to potentially have a competitive Senate race next year. There's a governor's race. There's a handful of congressional races for House seats that could get competitive as well. You will see the president continue to make these kinds of politically sensitive stops to highlight aspects of the bill, but also bolster local Democrats. Tomorrow, for example, he's going again to Michigan, a state he has visited frequently since he took office. He's probably going to hang out with Governor Whitmer, who faces a tough re-election fight next year. She'll be with him to talk about how this new law invests in and promotes the use of electric vehicles, most of which, many of them, would be developed there in the Detroit area. But again, expect to hear him over the course of the next several weeks. Travel the country, explain what's in this legislation, hang out with the local Democrat in need of some presidential support, and remind local voters why they should be reelected. And then you'll see not only him do this, but the vice president, for example, is headed to Columbus, Ohio on Friday for a similar visit. You will see cabinet officials do it. You'll see the first lady and the second gentleman do it as well. All of this, a keen understanding at this White House that when big legislation is passed, there's got to be a big sales job behind it. That during the Obama years, perhaps they didn't do a good enough job explaining and defending the Affordable Care Act, and that led to big losses in the 2010 midterm elections. This White House, looking at the bad polling numbers over the last several days, knows it's got to do something to reverse its fortunes and make sure voters are aware of what they've done.
Ed O'Keefe with a cup of coffee. I usually take mine with a little sweetener. You managed to provide that as well. So thank you so much, sir.
Take care.